Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are traveling back more than a century to a world lit by flickering candlelight, warmed by crackling fireplaces, and governed by countless unwritten rules. As you settle into a comfortable position, allow your breathing to become slower and gentler. There is nowhere else you need to be and nothing else you need to do. Our destination is Victorian England. When many people imagine this period, they often picture elegant ladies in flowing dresses, gentlemen wearing polished black coats, horse-drawn carriages rolling over cobblestone streets, and grand houses standing proudly behind iron gates. These images are not entirely wrong, but they reveal only a small part of everyday life. Behind those polished front doors lived ordinary families with ordinary routines, daily worries, quiet joys, and countless responsibilities. Their lives were shaped not only by love or personal choice, but also by traditions, expectations, religion, and social customs that influenced almost every moment of the day. Tonight, we are not searching for dramatic scandals or shocking secrets. Instead, we will quietly step inside the homes of Victorian couples to understand how they truly lived, how they built families, how they shared responsibilities, and how privacy meant something very different from what it means today. Take another slow breath. Imagine a peaceful evening in London around the year 1875. The rain has just stopped. Gas lamps glow softly along narrow streets, their warm light reflecting on wet stone roads. A carriage slowly passes, its wooden wheels making a gentle rhythm against the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell announces the passing of another hour. Inside a modest brick townhouse, a maid carefully closes heavy curtains before darkness completely settles outside. The family has nearly finished supper, and the smell of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and warm tea still lingers in the dining room. Unlike today, evenings are remarkably quiet. There is no television playing in the background, no mobile phones vibrate with endless notifications, no computers illuminate the room with bright screens. Instead, families gather around the fireplace. Some quietly read books, others mend clothing by candlelight. Children whisper while completing their lessons. Parents discuss tomorrow's household tasks in calm, measured voices. For many Victorian families, silence itself was considered a sign of respect and good manners. Life followed routines with surprising precision. People often rose shortly after sunrise, especially outside large cities. Household work began almost immediately. Floors were swept, fireplaces cleaned, meals prepared, water carried, and clothing repaired. Every member of the household, regardless of age, usually had responsibilities. Marriage during the Victorian era was rarely viewed as a purely romantic adventure. Love certainly existed, affection certainly existed, but marriage was also considered a partnership built upon duty, stability, family reputation, and shared responsibility. For many couples, their relationship was expected to provide order within the home rather than constant excitement. This expectation influenced everything from conversation at the dinner table to the way guests were welcomed into the house. In middle-class homes especially, maintaining respectability became one of life's greatest goals. The word respectable carried enormous weight. It described how a family dressed, how they spoke, how they entertained visitors, how they managed money. Even the appearance of one's front garden could quietly influence a family's reputation within the neighborhood. Victorian society valued self-control. Strong emotions were rarely displayed in public. People were encouraged to remain calm, composed, and polite, even during moments of sadness or disagreement. This did not mean people lacked deep feelings, quite the opposite. Many letters from the period reveal enormous affection between husbands and wives, yet those emotions were often expressed through carefully chosen words, thoughtful gestures, and acts of devotion, rather than loud public displays. Privacy also held a special meaning. Today, we often think of privacy as personal freedom. For Victorian families, privacy was closely connected with dignity. The home became a sanctuary, separating family life from the outside world. Heavy curtains, formal parlors, private sitting rooms, and carefully observed etiquette all helped create invisible boundaries between public appearance and domestic life. Visitors rarely wandered freely through every room. Certain areas remained reserved for family members alone. Bedrooms, in particular, were considered deeply personal spaces. Not mysterious, not scandalous, simply private. As we continue our journey, we will discover that these quiet rooms tell us much more about Victorian values than sensational stories ever could. Because history is often found in ordinary moments. A husband carefully removing his muddy boots before entering the house, a wife recording household expenses in a small notebook, children saying goodnight before climbing narrow wooden staircases, a kettle gently steaming beside the fireplace. Small details like these formed the rhythm of everyday married life. And surprisingly, many of those routines remained almost unchanged for decades. As the evening grows darker outside our imagined Victorian home, candles are trimmed to conserve wax, doors are checked, windows are latched, the fire burns lower. Soon the family will prepare for another ordinary day tomorrow. A day that, although it may seem simple, reflects an entire world of customs, expectations, and traditions waiting to be explored. So settle in comfortably, let your breathing remain slow and peaceful, and in the next chapter we will begin where many Victorian marriages truly began, not at the wedding ceremony itself, but long before, during the careful, patient, and highly structured process of courtship, where every conversation, every visit, and every glance carried meaning. As the evening quietly settles over our Victorian neighborhood, let us continue our gentle journey. The streets outside have grown calmer now. Most shopkeepers have lowered their shutters, the last horse-drawn carts have disappeared into the distance, and only the soft glow of gas lamps remains. Inside the homes, families begin preparing for another ordinary night, following routines that have changed very little from one generation to the next. To understand Victorian married life, we must first understand something very important. Marriage did not usually begin with sudden romance. Instead, it often began with patience. For many young men and women, finding a husband or wife was one of the most significant events of their lives, but it was also a process carefully guided by family, social expectations, and reputation. Unlike modern dating, people rarely spent long periods alone together before marriage. A respectable young woman was expected to protect her reputation above almost anything else. Even a simple afternoon walk could attract attention if it appeared improper. Because of this, many conversations between young couples happened in the presence of parents, relatives, or trusted family friends. A mother might quietly sit nearby while pretending to read. An aunt could remain in the same drawing room, sewing without saying very much. Everyone understood the purpose. The family wished to ensure that every interaction remained polite and respectable. To modernize, these customs may seem unusually strict, yet to Victorian families, they represented kindness rather than punishment. Parents believed they were protecting the future happiness of their children. Whether they always succeeded is another question entirely. Courtship itself followed a surprisingly gentle rhythm. Instead of long text messages or late-night phone calls, communication often happened through carefully written letters. Writing a letter required time. Ink had to dry. Paper had to be folded neatly. Envelopes were sealed with care. Then the letter traveled by post, sometimes taking days before reaching its destination. This slow pace encouraged thoughtful words. People often revised their sentences before sending them. Every phrase mattered. Every greeting carried meaning. Even the choice of paper or handwriting could quietly communicate personality. A well-written letter was considered a reflection of good character. Books of etiquette even offered advice about proper letter writing, helping young people avoid embarrassing mistakes. Visits between families were equally important. Rather than meeting privately in cafes or restaurants, many couples spent time together in family parlors. These rooms were designed to receive guests. Comfortable chairs faced each other. A piano often stood in one corner. Fresh flowers might decorate the mantelpiece above the fireplace. Tea was frequently served. Conversation remained calm and courteous. Politics and religion could be discussed, but carefully. Personal subjects were approached with patience. Good manners were not simply encouraged, they were expected. Listening politely became just as valuable as speaking well. In fact, silence itself could sometimes be considered a sign of wisdom. Victorian society admired restraint. People who interrupted constantly or spoke too loudly were often viewed as lacking refinement. Young gentlemen learned that confidence should never become arrogance. Young ladies learned that kindness should never disappear behind pride. Of course, real life was rarely perfect. Some couples genuinely fell deeply in love. Others married because their families believed the match was practical. Many relationships combined both affection and responsibility. History reminds us that human emotions have always been wonderfully complicated. Money also played a larger role than many modern people expect. Marriage affected property, inheritance, family businesses, and future security. Naturally, parents wished to see their children financially protected. This did not necessarily mean love was absent. Rather, practical concerns often stood beside romantic feelings. For working-class families, everyday survival required cooperation. A husband and wife worked together to earn income, manage food, repair clothing, and care for children. Life demanded teamwork. In wealthier households, servants handled many daily tasks. Yet, even there, running a large household required careful organization. Meals had to be planned, supplies ordered, staff supervised, visitors welcomed, charitable events attended. The lady of the house often carried enormous responsibility behind the scenes, even if history books have not always given her sufficient credit. Meanwhile, gentlemen were expected to demonstrate honesty, self-discipline, and reliability. A respectable husband should provide stability, protect his family, and behave with dignity. These expectations created enormous pressure for both men and women. Neither role was particularly easy. As our peaceful evening continues, imagine hearing the steady ticking of a tall grandfather clock in the hallway. Its slow rhythm reminds everyone that bedtime approaches. One by one, candles are extinguished in unused rooms. The household grows quieter. A child quietly yawns while holding a favorite storybook. Somewhere upstairs, someone gently folds tomorrow's clothing before placing it neatly upon a wooden chair. Simple habits like these created a comforting sense of order. Victorian families often believed that a well-organized home reflected a well-organized life. Whether this was always true hardly mattered. The belief itself shaped daily behavior. Before long, the entire house seems wrapped in silence. Only the occasional crackle from the fireplace and the faint sound of wind brushing against the windows remain. In this calm atmosphere, tomorrow's responsibilities can wait. For now, the household rests peacefully. And in the next chapter of our journey, we will quietly step inside a Victorian wedding day itself, exploring how couples prepared for marriage, what ceremonies look like, and how tradition shaped one of the most important days of their lives. Now that the house has grown quiet, let us continue our slow journey into another ordinary day in Victorian England. Imagine that it is a cool spring morning in the year 1882. The first rays of sunlight gently filter through heavy curtains, while somewhere outside, a milk cart rolls down the street. A rooster calls from a nearby yard, and the faint ringing of church bells reminds the town that another day has begun. Inside the household, the wake up early. Victorian mornings rarely began in a rush. Instead, they followed familiar routines that had been repeated countless times before. The fireplace must be prepared. Fresh water needs to be carried. Breakfast must be organized. Windows are opened briefly to let in fresh air before being closed again against the morning chill. Even in wealthier households, the beginning of the day was carefully planned. The lady of the house often reviewed the day's responsibilities before breakfast had even finished. She might check supplies in the kitchen, write shopping lists, review household accounts, or organize visits from friends and relatives. Running a Victorian home was often compared to managing a small business. Every loaf of bread, every candle, every piece of coal represented money carefully spent. Waste was discouraged. Carefulness was admired. Meanwhile, the gentleman of the household prepared for his own duties. If he worked in business, law, medicine, or government, punctuality mattered greatly. His clothing was expected to be clean and properly pressed. A neatly tied cravat, polished boots, and a carefully brushed coat were not simply matters of fashion. They reflected discipline and self-respect. First impressions carried tremendous importance. Many Victorians believed that appearance revealed character. Whether this belief was fair is another question, but it shaped daily life in countless ways. Breakfast itself was usually a quiet affair. Unlike modern families rushing between work and school, Victorian households often viewed breakfast as an orderly beginning of the day. Fresh bread, porridge, eggs, tea, butter, preserves, and occasionally smoked fish might appear on the table depending on the family's income. Conversation remained polite. Loud arguments were considered poor manners. Children were expected to sit properly, speak respectfully, and listen when adults were talking. Good habits, parents believed, were learned one ordinary morning at a time. After breakfast, husbands and wives often separated to manage different responsibilities. This division of work reflected the customs of the period rather than a lack of affection. In many homes, both partners worked hard, simply in different ways. The husband frequently dealt with employment, finances, or business outside the home. The wife usually supervised domestic life, organized servants if the family could afford them, cared for children, planned meals, repaired clothing, and kept detailed household records. Although history has often focused on famous politicians and industrialists, countless Victorian households depended upon the quiet organizational skills of women whose names never appeared in newspapers. Their work rarely attracted public attention, yet without it, daily life would have quickly fallen into disorder. Respect between husband and wife often appeared in practical ways. A husband might bring home books his wife wished to read. A wife might quietly prepare his favorite evening tea after a particularly difficult day. These gestures were usually small. They were not dramatic, but they reflected companionship built through everyday kindness. Victorian marriages were not identical. Some couples enjoyed deep friendship. Others struggled with disagreement. Some families laughed often. Others lived with silence. Just like today, every household possessed its own personality. One common misunderstanding is that Victorian couples never expressed affection. The truth is more balanced. Public displays of affection were generally modest. Holding hands in certain situations could be perfectly acceptable. Letters between married couples often contained warm expressions of devotion. Birthday gifts, anniversary presents, flowers, books, or handwritten notes quietly demonstrated care. Love existed. It simply followed the language and customs of its own time. As the afternoon arrives, sunlight gently moves across polished wooden floors. Dust dances quietly through narrow beams of light. Somewhere nearby, a piano lesson begins. Its slow melody drifts through the open hallway before fading once more into silence. Children return from school. Servants prepare the evening meal. Shopkeepers close their businesses. Factories gradually empty. Horse-drawn omnibuses carry workers home through busy streets. Everywhere, people return to the place they value most, their home. Because for many Victorians, home represented more than shelter. It represented respectability, security, routine, family, and perhaps, after a long day's work, a little peace. As evening approaches once again, candles are lit one by one. Books are opened, letters are answered, tea is poured into delicate china cups. Outside, the world grows darker. Inside, another ordinary Victorian evening begins exactly as countless others have before. Without realizing it, we have already discovered one of history's greatest secrets. The lives of Victorian couples were rarely filled with constant drama. Instead, they were shaped by thousands of ordinary moments, small conversations, shared meals, quiet responsibilities, patient routines, and mutual efforts to build a stable home. It may sound surprisingly familiar, because despite the passing of more than 100 years, many of the hopes people carried into marriage remain much the same today. In the next chapter, we'll step even deeper into Victorian domestic life, exploring the rooms of the house itself, how homes were arranged, why privacy mattered so much, and what daily life behind those carefully closed doors was truly like. By now, the evening has settled comfortably over our quiet Victorian neighborhood. The streets outside are nearly empty. A faint mist drifts along the cobblestones, softening the glow of the gas lamps that stand watch at every corner. Somewhere in the distance, the last carriage of the evening slowly disappears, its wheels making a familiar rhythm against the stone road. Inside the house, however, life continues in its own gentle way. Victorian homes were much more than buildings made of brick, wood, and stone. To the people who lived inside them, a home represented character. Visitors often formed opinions about an entire family within moments of entering the front door. A tidy entrance suggested discipline. A clean fireplace suggested responsibility. Even the arrangement of books on a shelf could quietly communicate education and taste. For middle-class families especially, the home became a reflection of personal values. The front hallway was usually kept neat and welcoming. Umbrellas rested inside carefully made stands. Coats hung in orderly rows. Boots were cleaned before entering, particularly during rainy weather. These small habits may seem ordinary today, but Victorians believed they revealed respect for both one's family and one's guests. As we gently step farther inside, we arrive at the drawing room. This was often the heart of social life. Friends gathered here for afternoon tea, neighbors exchanged news. Children practiced the piano while parents quietly listened. Guests admired family photographs arranged neatly upon polished tables. Books, paintings, embroidered cushions, and carefully selected ornaments decorated the room without appearing excessive. Conversation flowed politely. People discussed literature, travel, gardening, music, and occasionally politics, although some families preferred lighter subjects during social visits. Laughter certainly existed, but loud behavior was usually discouraged. Composure was admired. Listening carefully was considered a sign of refinement. Nearby stood another important room, the dining room. Unlike modern families who often eat quickly before returning to busy schedules, Victorian dinners were frequently viewed as meaningful family occasions. Meals followed a certain order. Courses arrived one after another. Napkins were folded neatly. Silverware had its proper place. Children learned table manners from an early age, understanding that courtesy was expected every day rather than only during special celebrations. Dinner also offered husbands and wives one of the few opportunities to sit together after fulfilling separate responsibilities throughout the day. These quiet conversations strengthened family life. They discussed household expenses, children's education, upcoming visits, letters received from relatives, or plans for Sunday church services. Rarely dramatic, yet deeply important. As evening continued, many families gathered near the fireplace. The warm glow of burning coal created an atmosphere that encouraged conversation and relaxation. Someone might read aloud from a recently published novel. Another family member carefully repaired clothing. Children completed school exercises beneath the gentle light of an oil lamp. Sometimes music filled a room. Victorian households greatly valued amateur music. A daughter practicing the piano or a son learning the violin was a familiar evening scene. No audience beyond the family was necessary. The music itself became part of the household's rhythm. Now, let us gently climb the staircase. The wooden steps creak softly beneath our feet. Upstairs, we find several bedrooms, each serving practical rather than luxurious purposes. Contrary to many popular films, most Victorian bedrooms were not extravagantly decorated. Even comfortable homes favored usefulness over unnecessary display. Heavy curtains helped keep warmth inside during winter. Washstands held pitchers of fresh water for morning washing. Simple wardrobes stored carefully folded clothing. Family Bibles, prayer books, and treasured letters often rested on bedside tables. Bedrooms were peaceful places intended for rest, reflection, and privacy. Privacy itself held enormous importance, not because families wished to hide scandalous secrets. Rather, Victorians believed that every household needed spaces where family members could simply be themselves without public attention. The outside world demanded constant politeness. Inside the home, people could finally relax. A husband returning from work removed the formal appearance required by business. A wife who had managed countless responsibilities throughout the day could finally enjoy a few quiet moments beside the fire. Children laughed more freely once visitors had departed. The home became a refuge from public expectations. Another fascinating feature of Victorian homes was the study or library when space allowed. Here, fathers often managed correspondence, financial records, and business papers. Shelves filled with books reflected both education and personal curiosity. Reading became one of the era's greatest pleasures. History, poetry, geography, science, and travel accounts transported readers far beyond the walls of their homes. For many couples, reading together during the evening became a peaceful shared activity. One person might read aloud while the other quietly listened. Sometimes the conversation that followed lasted much longer than the reading itself. These simple evenings remind us that entertainment did not always require excitement. Often, contentment came from familiar routines shared with people one trusted. As the night grows later, servants, where employed, quietly complete their final duties. Candles are extinguished room by room. The front door is locked. The curtains remain tightly drawn against the cool night air.
Outside, London continues to sleep beneath a blanket of mist. Inside, the house has become wonderfully still. Only the slow ticking of a clock and the occasional crackle from the fireplace break the silence. It is in moments like these that Victorian married life feels most understandable. Not because it was perfect, not because every family lived happily, but because ordinary people, just like today, searched for comfort, stability, companionship, and a peaceful place to end each day. As we allow this quiet household to rest, our journey is only beginning. In the next chapter, we will explore one of the most fascinating aspects of Victorian domestic life: how husbands and wives balance responsibility, affection, personal independence, and the expectations that society placed upon them, often in ways far more complex than modern myths suggest.
As another peaceful Victorian evening settles into silence, let us remain inside this warm family home for just a little longer. Outside, a gentle breeze brushes against the trees lining the quiet street. Somewhere far away, a church clock calmly strikes 9 times before fading once again into the night. The city has not fallen completely asleep, but it has certainly slowed. Inside the house, the pace of life becomes even gentler. The drawing room has grown quieter. The fire burns lower than before, its orange glow dancing across polished wooden furniture. Shadows stretch softly across the wallpaper, giving every room a calm and comforting appearance. For many Victorian couples, these evening hours were among the few moments of the day that truly belonged to them. The work had largely been completed, the visitors had returned home, the children, if there were any, were slowly making their way upstairs. Finally, the household could breathe. One of the greatest misconceptions about Victorian marriage is that husbands and wives lived almost entirely separate lives. In reality, while their responsibilities were often different, their daily routines frequently depended upon careful cooperation. A successful household required teamwork. The husband might spend long hours outside the home earning an income. The wife often managed everything happening within its walls. Neither role was particularly simple. Each required patience, planning, and quiet determination. The household budget, for example, demanded constant attention. Every purchase mattered. Coal for the fireplace, fresh bread from the local baker, candles for the coming week, fabric to repair worn clothing, soap for washing, tea, sugar, flour, butter, and seasonal vegetables. Nothing was purchased carelessly. Many Victorian wives kept detailed household account books. Every expense, no matter how small, could be carefully written down in neat handwriting. These records helped families avoid unnecessary spending and prepare for difficult times. It was not unusual for husbands to review these household accounts together with their wives. Money, after all, affected every member of the family. Although Victorian society often expected men to manage major financial decisions, many women possessed remarkable skill in stretching limited resources. A careful household manager could make a modest income support an entire family. This quiet talent rarely appeared in history books, yet it played an enormous role in everyday life. Cleanliness also became increasingly important throughout the Victorian era. People began paying greater attention to hygiene than earlier generations had. Homes were aired regularly, floors were swept daily, beds were carefully made every morning. Laundry, although exhausting work before modern washing machines, remained an essential part of household life. Fresh linens were considered a sign of respectability. Even simple curtains might be removed, washed, dried, and carefully hung again. These tasks demanded time, but Victorians believed they reflected both discipline and pride. As evening conversations continued beside the fire, husbands and wives often discussed practical matters rather than dramatic adventures. Which relative should be visited next Sunday? Would enough coal remain until the end of the week? Should the eldest child begin new lessons? Was the roof still leaking after yesterday's rain? Ordinary questions, ordinary answers. Yet together they slowly built the foundation of family life. Perhaps that is history's quietest lessons. Most marriages are not shaped by extraordinary moments. They are shaped by thousands of ordinary decisions repeated day after day. Patience shown during difficult weeks, small kindnesses offered without expecting praise, responsibilities quietly shared. Victorian couples understood this perhaps better than many people imagine. That does not mean every marriage was happy, far from it. Some couples experienced deep affection, others struggled with illness, financial hardship, or personal disappointment. History rarely gives us perfect stories. Instead, it offers real people living complicated lives. One particularly charming evening tradition involved reading aloud. Books remained treasured possessions. Not every family owned large libraries, but many households possessed several well-loved volumes. Charles Dickens, poetry collections, travel journals, sermons, newspapers, and historical works all found eager readers. Sometimes the husband read aloud while everyone listened. Sometimes the wife did. Older children occasionally practiced their reading before younger brothers and sisters. The activity entertained the family while strengthening education at the same time. Music brought similar comfort. A simple piano filled countless Victorian homes. No professional performance was expected. A familiar melody played imperfectly by a family member could be every bit as enjoyable. Songs drifted gently through the house before disappearing into the quiet night beyond the windows. These peaceful evenings remind us that happiness did not always require expensive entertainment. Conversation, books, music, tea, a warm fire, these simple comforts often proved more than enough. As bedtime slowly approached, routines became wonderfully predictable. The fireplace was checked, doors were locked tightly against the cold, candles were carefully extinguished one by one. Children were reminded to say their evening prayers before climbing into bed. Parents took one final walk through the house, ensuring everything remained safe until morning. Only then did true silence settle over the home. The hallway stood empty. The staircase rested quietly. The last glowing embers in the fireplace faded from bright orange to soft red. Outside, fog drifted gently beneath the gas lamps. Inside, another ordinary Victorian day had peacefully come to an end. It may seem almost event-nothing, but perhaps that is exactly why these stories continue to fascinate us, because hidden beneath ordinary routines were real people searching for stability, companionship, and a peaceful life, hopes that remain surprisingly familiar even today. So, as our imaginary household falls asleep beneath heavy blankets and the comforting stillness of the Victorian night, allow yourself to relax a little more. In the next chapter, we will quietly explore another fascinating question: how Victorian husbands and wives communicated their affection, resolved disagreements, and maintained lasting relationships within a society guided by strict customs and quiet expectations.
The house has now become wonderfully quiet. Only the faint ticking of the hallway clock continues its steady rhythm, marking each passing second with patient certainty. Outside, a cool breeze moves gently through the narrow streets, carrying with it the distant sound of a carriage returning home before midnight. Inside, nearly everyone has retired for the evening. The last candle downstairs has been extinguished.
Only a single lamp still glows softly in an upstairs room, where its warm light spills gently beneath the door before disappearing into the dark hallway. As we continue our peaceful journey, let us spend a little time exploring something that history often overlooks. Not grand political speeches or famous battles, but the quiet conversations that shaped ordinary marriages. Victorian husbands and wives spoke with one another every day, of course. Yet their conversations often sounded quite different from those we might hear today. Courtesy remained important, even within the family. Many couples addressed one another with remarkable politeness, particularly in front of guests or children. Good manners were considered a lifelong habit, rather than something reserved only for strangers. Simple expressions such as please, thank you, and if you would be so kind appeared frequently in both speech and written correspondence. To modern ears, these conversations might seem unusually formal, but formality did not always mean distance. Sometimes it reflected respect. Many husbands and wives gradually developed their own private routines of communication. A gentle smile across the breakfast table, a favorite chair reserved beside the fireplace, a familiar evening walk through the garden. These ordinary habits quietly strengthened companionship over the years. Letters remained important even after marriage. When work, travel, or family responsibilities separated couples for several days or weeks, handwritten letters became treasured possessions. Unlike today's instant messages, Victorian letters invited reflection. People often described the weather, family news, household matters, and hopes for the future in careful detail. Many surviving letters reveal warmth, humor, encouragement, and genuine affection. Historians sometimes discover pressed flowers tucked between their pages, tiny reminders that even the smallest keepsake could carry deep personal meaning. Disagreements, naturally, were part of married life as well. No household escaped occasional misunderstandings. Perhaps a planned purchase proved too expensive. Perhaps a relative overstayed a visit. Perhaps differing opinions arose over children's education or household priorities. Victorian etiquette encouraged couples to resolve such matters calmly whenever possible. Raising one's voice was generally viewed as a failure of self-control. Whether every family followed this ideal is impossible to know. Human nature has changed very little across the centuries. Still, the ideal itself tells us something important. Victorian society admired patience. Patience during conversation. Patience during hardship. Patience while building a life together, one ordinary day at a time. Religion also influenced many marriages. For countless families, attending church every Sunday formed part of the weekly routine. Faith offered guidance, comfort, and a shared sense of purpose. Church communities organized charitable events, supported neighbors in difficult times, and celebrated important family milestones. Baptisms, weddings, and anniversaries often strengthened friendships that lasted for decades. Community life mattered deeply. Neighbors frequently knew one another well. Shopkeepers recognized regular customers. Postmen greeted familiar households. Children played together beneath the watchful eyes of nearby adults. In many neighborhoods, people quietly looked after one another. If illness entered one home, meals sometimes appeared from caring neighbors. If tragedy struck, the local community often responded with remarkable generosity. These acts of kindness rarely found their way into history books, yet they shaped everyday life far more than many famous events. Inside the home, evenings continued to unfold at their gentle pace. The fire crackled softly. A kettle quietly warmed beside the hearth. Perhaps someone knit a new scarf for the coming winter. Another family member carefully repaired a worn jacket rather than replacing it. Victorians valued usefulness. Objects were repaired whenever possible. Waste was discouraged. Even wrapping paper, ribbons, glass bottles, and wooden boxes often found new purposes instead of being discarded. This careful attitude extended beyond possessions. Time itself was considered valuable. People planned their days thoughtfully. Meals followed regular schedules. Household routines created comforting predictability. For children especially, these routines offered a sense of security. Bedtime itself became a peaceful ritual. Hands and faces were washed using cool water poured from ceramic pitchers. Night clothes were neatly folded during the day and carefully unfolded each evening. Curtains were drawn tightly. Prayers were quietly spoken. Parents wished their children good night before closing bedroom doors with gentle care. As silence gradually filled the house, even the city outside seemed to grow quieter. The busy marketplace had long since emptied. Factory whistles no longer echoed across the rooftops. Only the occasional footsteps of a night watchman disturbed the stillness as he continued his slow patrol beneath the glowing gas lamps. Imagine standing for just a moment beside one of those upstairs windows. Beyond the glass stretches a peaceful Victorian street bathed in moonlight. Rows of brick houses stand quietly together. Every home contains its own story, some filled with laughter, some carrying sorrow, most simply occupied by ordinary families doing their best with the lives they had been given. Perhaps that's why Victorian history continues to fascinate us. It reminds us that beneath changing fashions, new inventions, and passing generations, people have always searched for many of the same things: a warm home, a dependable companion, meaningful work, kind neighbors, peace at the end of a long day. Those hopes feel just as familiar now as they did more than 100 years ago. So allow the comforting silence of this Victorian evening to settle gently around you. Take another slow breath. Relax your shoulders. Let your thoughts drift as calmly as the smoke rising from the last glowing embers of the fireplace. In our next chapter, we will quietly explore how Victorian families marked the changing seasons of the year, from peaceful spring mornings to cozy winter evenings, and how those seasonal rhythms shaped married life in ways that may surprise us today. As the night grows deeper, our quiet Victorian home seems almost frozen in time. The fire has settled into a bed of glowing ambers, casting a soft amber light across the room. Outside, a thin layer of mist hangs over the streets, gently wrapping the city in silence. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower quietly announces another passing hour, its bells drifting through the cool night air before fading away once more. For the family sleeping inside these brick homes, tomorrow will arrive much as yesterday did. That steady rhythm was one of the defining features of Victorian life. Modern life often moves quickly. Each day brings new technology, constant messages, and endless distractions. Victorian families experienced change as well, especially during the Industrial Revolution. But inside the home, daily routines remained surprisingly consistent. There was comfort in knowing what tomorrow would bring. The changing seasons, however, gently shaped those routines. Let us begin with spring. After the long, damp winter months, spring brought a welcome feeling of renewal. Windows were open to allow fresh air inside. Heavy blankets were folded away. Gardens slowly awakened with color as roses, tulips, and lavender began to bloom. For many households, spring cleaning became an important tradition. Every room received careful attention. Curtains were removed and washed. Carpets were beaten outdoors to remove months of accumulated dust. Shelves were emptied, polished, and carefully rearranged once again. Furniture was moved so every hidden corner could be cleaned. Although the work demanded great effort, many families viewed it as a fresh beginning. A clean home reflected a hopeful spirit. As spring gradually became summer, daily life shifted once again. The days grew longer. Sunlight lingered well into the evening. Children spent more time outdoors. Families enjoyed quiet walks through public parks or peaceful country lanes whenever their schedules allowed. For those living in London, parks offered precious moments of fresh air away from the crowded streets. Couples often strolled beneath large trees, admiring flower gardens or watching boats drift across small lakes. These simple outings required little expense. Conversation, fresh air, and gentle company were often enough. Summer also meant lighter meals. Fresh vegetables appeared more frequently on the table. Strawberries, cherries, peas, and early potatoes became welcome additions to family dinners. Markets filled with seasonal produce, creating colorful displays that brightened even ordinary shopping trips. Autumn arrived quietly. Leaves turned shades of gold, amber, and deep crimson. Morning air became cooler. Families prepared for the coming winter by repairing roofs, checking fireplaces, and storing supplies. Coal deliveries became increasingly important. Without a reliable source of fuel, the cold months could be extremely uncomfortable. Households also preserved food whenever possible. Jams, pickles, and bottled fruits helped provide variety during winter when fresh produce became scarce. These careful preparations reflected another Victorian value: planning ahead. People understood that comfort during winter depended largely upon the work completed during autumn. Few believed in leaving important matters until the last moment. Then came winter. For many Victorians, winter transformed the home into the center of family life. Darkness arrived early. Cold winds swept through city streets. Rain often turned roads into thick mud. Snow occasionally covered rooftops with quiet beauty. Inside, however, families gathered close to the fireplace. Its warmth became both practical and comforting. Evenings seemed longer. Books remained open for hours. Needlework continued beside the fire. Children played quiet games beneath the watchful eyes of their parents. Stories were told. Memories were shared. Simple moments became treasured traditions. Victorian Christmas celebrations gradually became more familiar to us than we might expect. Decorated evergreen trees, exchanged gifts, holiday cards, family dinners, and cheerful music all grew increasingly popular during Queen Victoria's reign. Many customs still practiced today became firmly established during this remarkable period. The holiday emphasized generosity, family togetherness, and gratitude. For children especially, Christmas morning carried enormous excitement. Yet even after the celebrations ended, ordinary life quietly returned. The decorations were carefully packed away. Schools reopened. Businesses resumed. The familiar rhythm of everyday responsibilities continued. Perhaps that steady return to routine explains why Victorian homes felt so reassuring. Special occasions were celebrated warmly, but ordinary days were never considered unimportant. Every breakfast, every evening conversation, every carefully prepared meal, every letter written, every family walk. Together, they formed a lifetime. Historians sometimes focus on kings, queens, inventors, and famous politicians. Yet the true story of Victorian England was written inside thousands of ordinary homes, just like the one we have been quietly visiting tonight. Each family experienced its own joys and disappointments. Each marriage followed its own path. Some households welcomed prosperity. Others faced hardship with remarkable courage. But nearly all shared one common hope: to create a peaceful home where tomorrow felt a little more secure than yesterday. As our imaginary evening slowly comes to an end, the wind outside has become softer. The mist settles gently upon the rooftops. Inside the house, every candle has now been extinguished. The final glow from the fireplace slowly fades into darkness. The grandfather clock continues its steady ticking, faithfully measuring another quiet Victorian night. Allow yourself to breathe slowly once more. Imagine this peaceful home resting beneath the moonlight, untouched by hurry or noise. There is no rush here, only calm, only quiet, only the comforting rhythm of ordinary life. And in the next chapter, we will gently step beyond the walls of the family home to discover how Victorian husbands and wives experienced village life, city neighborhoods, local markets, churches, and the close-knit communities that shaped so much of their everyday world.
The night has become wonderfully still. The city outside rests beneath a quiet blanket of moonlight, while the last glowing embers in our fireplace slowly surrender their warmth. Every room in the house has fallen silent. Upstairs, the family sleeps peacefully, unaware that another ordinary day has quietly become part of history. For us, however, the journey continues. This time, let us gently open the front door and step outside. The cool evening air greets us softly as we walk onto a narrow cobblestone street lined with rows of brick houses. Gas lamps cast warm circles of light onto the damp pavement, while faint wisps of fog drift lazily through the neighborhood. Victorian streets were rarely completely silent. Even late in the evening, small sounds remained. A distant horse gently stamping its feet, a night watchman making his rounds, the quiet rumble of a carriage crossing an old bridge. Somewhere, a church bell marking the passing hour. Unlike the constant noise of modern cities, these sounds appeared one at a time, separated by long moments of peaceful silence. It is easy to imagine why evenings often felt so calming. As morning arrived, however, the streets transformed completely. Shopkeepers swept the front of their stores before opening for business. Bakers filled the air with the comforting smell of fresh bread. Milk deliveries began shortly after sunrise. Children hurried toward school, carrying small books beneath their arms. Workers disappeared into factories, offices, workshops, and markets. Every person contributed to the quiet rhythm of the community. For married couples, these neighborhoods offered something modern life sometimes struggles to provide: a strong sense of familiarity. Most people knew their neighbors. The local baker recognized regular customers. The butcher often remembered each family's usual order. The postman rarely needed to ask for directions. Even children were expected to greet adults politely as they walked through the neighborhood. Trust developed slowly, over many years. Of course, communities were not perfect. Arguments happened. Gossip spread surprisingly quickly. News traveled from one doorstep to another with remarkable speed. Without radios or television, conversation itself became one of the fastest ways information moved. A single unusual event could become the subject of discussion across an entire neighborhood before sunset. For Victorian couples, maintaining a good reputation within the community mattered greatly. Kindness toward neighbors was remembered. Generosity during difficult times earned lasting respect. Likewise, dishonesty or carelessness could damage a family's standing for years. This encouraged many households to value honesty, reliability, and courtesy. Churches also stood at the center of community life. Whether families were deeply religious or simply followed local custom, Sunday services brought neighbors together. After worship, conversations often continued outside, beneath clear skies or gentle rain. Children played nearby, while adults exchanged news about harvests, business, education, or relatives living in distant towns. These gatherings strengthened friendships that sometimes lasted an entire lifetime. Markets created another important meeting place.
Imagine strolling slowly through a Victorian market on a crisp autumn morning. Wooden stalls display apples, carrots, onions, fresh herbs, cheeses, and baskets overflowing with seasonal produce. Fishmongers arrange their morning catch upon beds of crushed ice. Florists offer colorful bouquets carefully tied with ribbon. Tailors proudly display newly finished coats in shop windows. The air carries countless gentle scents: fresh bread, roasted chestnuts, soap, leather, tea, coal smoke drifting lazily above nearby rooftops. For many husbands and wives, visiting the market together became an ordinary weekly tradition. They compared prices, selected vegetables, purchased fabric, stopped briefly to greet familiar faces. These errands may seem simple today, yet they formed an important part of shared domestic life. A household depended upon careful planning. Every purchase reflected both necessity and thoughtful budgeting. Beyond the busy streets stood public parks offering peaceful escapes from crowded neighborhoods. Queen Victoria's reign saw the creation and improvement of many green spaces where families could relax. On pleasant afternoons, families walked beneath towering trees while children chased one another across open lawns. Some visitors quietly read newspapers on wooden benches. Others watched ducks glide across still ponds. Fresh air was believed to benefit both body and mind. Doctors often recommended gentle walks for health. Whether scientifically proven or not, many people certainly enjoyed them. As evening approached, families gradually returned home carrying parcels under their arms. The smell of supper drifted through open windows. Curtains were drawn. Lamps were lit. Another ordinary day quietly reached its conclusion. Looking back, one remarkable truth becomes clear. Victorian marriage was never isolated from the surrounding community. Neighbors, shopkeepers, teachers, churches, markets, friends, relatives, together they formed a network that supported everyday family life. Marriage was not simply a relationship between two individuals. It also connected two families and often an entire neighborhood. Perhaps that is why community mattered so deeply. People understood that difficult days would eventually come: illness, financial hardship, unexpected loss. During such moments, trusted neighbors frequently became invaluable. History often remembers the great inventors, political leaders, and explorers of the Victorian age. Yet the quieter story belongs to ordinary families who greeted each other each morning, shared simple meals, exchanged friendly conversations across garden fences, and slowly built communities through everyday acts of kindness. Now, the streets have once again fallen silent. The market stalls stand empty. The church doors are closed until morning. Only the gentle glow of the gas lamps remains. Take another slow breath. Imagine yourself walking peacefully back toward our warm Victorian home. The front door opens with a quiet creak. Inside, everything is calm. The familiar clock continues its patient ticking. The fire has almost disappeared into soft gray ash. Soon we will climb the staircase once more and discover how Victorian families ended their evenings, prepared for sleep, and created bedtime routines that reflected the values of an age built upon order, comfort, and quiet companionship.
Our gentle walk through the quiet Victorian streets has brought us home once again. The front door closes softly behind us, shutting out the cool night air. Instantly, the familiar warmth of the house returns. The scent of polished wood, extinguished candles, and the last traces of burning coal linger peacefully in the air. Everything feels calm. Everything feels settled. It is now the final hour before sleep, one of the most peaceful moments of an ordinary Victorian day. Unlike our modern evenings filled with glowing screens and constant notifications, bedtime in the 19th century arrived naturally. Darkness itself encouraged rest. Without bright electric lighting in most homes, families slowly adjusted their routines according to the setting sun. As the evening deepened, activity gradually faded. Books were closed. Letters were folded carefully. Teacups were washed and returned to their shelves. The piano lid was gently lowered after one final melody. Parents quietly reminded their children that it was time to prepare for bed. These routines happened so regularly that they became almost comforting. Children rarely questioned them. Adults rarely hurried them. The rhythm had been passed from one generation to another. Before climbing upstairs, many families spent a few quiet moments together beside the fireplace. It was often the warmest place in the house. A father might tell a short story from his childhood. A mother might finish knitting another few rows of a scarf that would not be needed until winter. Older children sometimes practiced reading aloud. Younger brothers and sisters listened while fighting to keep their eyes open. No one seemed in a particular hurry. Time moved differently here. When bedtime finally arrived, everyone followed familiar habits. Candles or oil lamps were carried carefully upstairs. The staircase remained dimly lit, and each step echoed softly through the silent house. Bedrooms were usually cool, especially during the colder months. Large, feather-filled mattresses rested upon sturdy wooden bedsteads. Several heavy blankets waited neatly folded. A ceramic pitcher filled with fresh water often stood beside a matching wash basin. Before sleeping, family members commonly washed their hands and faces. Though simple, this routine reflected the growing Victorian interest in cleanliness and personal hygiene. Hair was brushed. Clothing was folded carefully rather than dropped upon the floor. Boots were placed neatly beside the bed, ready for the morning. Order mattered, not because anyone expected perfection, but because small habits were believed to build good character. One charming tradition in many households involved saying goodnight to every member of the family. Parents wished their children peaceful sleep. Children answered politely before climbing beneath warm blankets. These quiet exchanges may have lasted only a few moments, yet they strengthened the feeling that home was a place of safety. For married couples, the final hour of the evening often became the first truly peaceful moment they had shared all day. The responsibilities of work had ended. Household tasks were complete. Visitors had departed. The children were asleep. At last, there was time simply to enjoy the silence together. Sometimes they spoke quietly about tomorrow's plans. Perhaps they discussed an upcoming journey to visit relatives. Perhaps they reviewed household expenses once more. Perhaps they simply admired the comforting sound of rain falling outside. Many evenings required no conversation at all. Companionship itself was enough. Modern historians sometimes describe this as the quiet intimacy of everyday life, not dramatic or extraordinary, but built upon years of shared routines, mutual respect, and familiar comfort. Victorian homes also reflected the seasons during bedtime. In winter, hot bricks wrapped in cloth were sometimes placed beneath blankets before bedtime to make cold beds more comfortable. During summer, windows might remain slightly open to invite cooler evening air into the room. Heavy curtains helped block early morning sunlight while also keeping drafts away during colder nights. Every detail served a practical purpose. Nighttime also brought another familiar sound that many Victorians remembered throughout their lives: the steady ticking of clocks. Large grandfather clocks in hallways measured every passing minute with remarkable consistency. Pocket watches rested upon bedside tables. Church bells occasionally echoed through sleeping neighborhoods, quietly reminding listeners that another hour had slipped away. Without modern distractions, these gentle sounds became part of everyday life. Outside, the streets belonged mostly to the night watchmen. Wrapped in heavy coats, They slowly walked through neighborhoods carrying lanterns. Their presence reassured sleeping families that someone remained awake while the city rested. The occasional bark of a dog, a horse shifting inside its stable, a distant train whistle on newer railway lines. These sounds blended naturally into the peaceful soundtrack of Victorian nights. Perhaps this slower pace explains why so many diaries from the era describe evenings with surprising affection. They speak not of constant excitement, but of simple satisfaction. A successful day meant honest work completed, family gathered safely beneath one roof, enough food upon the table, a warm fire, a comfortable bed. These ordinary blessings were never taken for granted. As we sit quietly in this peaceful bedroom, the final candle begins to burn lower. Its gentle flame flickers against the wallpaper before becoming smaller with each passing moment. The house has become completely silent now. Even the wind outside seems to have paused. Take another slow breath. Imagine yourself wrapped in the comforting stillness of this Victorian home. There is nothing left to finish, nothing left to organize. Tomorrow can wait until morning. Tonight belongs to rest. And as sleep slowly settles over every room of the house, our journey will continue in the next chapter, where we will discover how Victorian families celebrated life's happiest milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and quiet family traditions that brought generations together beneath the same welcoming roof.
As the gentle rain continues to fall outside our quiet Victorian home, the night feels softer than ever. Each raindrop taps lightly against the window panes, blending with the slow ticking of the hallway clock. Somewhere in the distance, a steam locomotive lets out a faint whistle before disappearing into the darkness. That distant sound reminds us that while life inside the Victorian home often felt calm and predictable, the world beyond its walls was changing at an astonishing pace. The Victorian era was an age of remarkable invention. Railways stretched across Britain, telegraph wires carried messages faster than anyone had imagined possible. Factories produced goods in enormous quantities. Cities expanded year after year. Yet despite these dramatic changes, ordinary married couples still valued many of the same simple pleasures they always had. One of the greatest adventures a Victorian couple could enjoy was a railway journey. Today, boarding a train may seem entirely ordinary, but during the 19th century, rail travel transformed everyday life. Journeys that once required several exhausting days by horse and carriage could suddenly be completed within hours. For many families, their first train ride became an unforgettable memory. Imagine arriving at a busy Victorian railway station. Steam rises gently from the great iron engine waiting beside the platform. Porters push wooden luggage carts from one carriage to another. Conductors check tickets while passengers greet relatives with cheerful smiles. Large station clocks keep everyone moving according to schedule. The air carries the scent of coal smoke mixed with fresh morning air. Everything feels exciting. Everything feels new. As the train begins to move, the countryside slowly unfolds beyond the window. Rolling green fields, stone cottages, quiet villages, church towers rising above ancient trees, farmers guiding horses through open meadows, children waving enthusiastically as the train passes. For many Victorian husbands and wives, these journeys offered rare opportunities to escape daily responsibilities. Conversation flowed more freely. Books accompanied the journey. Some passengers quietly admired the scenery, while others simply enjoyed the gentle rocking motion of the train. Popular destinations often included seaside towns. Doctors of the time frequently recommended sea air as beneficial for health. Whether those recommendations always proved correct mattered less than the enjoyment families found beside the coast. Imagine arriving in a peaceful seaside village. Fresh ocean breezes replace the smoky air of the city. Gentle waves roll onto wide, sandy beaches. Fishing boats rest quietly in the harbor. Elegant promenades invite visitors to stroll slowly while listening to the cries of distant seagulls. Couples often walked arm in arm beneath colorful parasols, enjoying conversations that required no particular destination. Children built simple sand castles. Families collected seashells. Some adventurous visitors even dipped their feet into the surprisingly cold water. For many Victorians, these holidays represented luxury, even when they lasted only a few days. Returning home afterward often brought renewed appreciation for familiar routines. There is something comforting about leaving home for a short while and discovering how pleasant it feels to return. Technology continued changing everyday life as well. The telegraph allowed urgent messages to travel across great distances within minutes. Newspapers reached readers more quickly than ever before. Gas lighting gradually brightened city streets, making evening travel safer and more convenient. Toward the end of Queen Victoria's reign, electricity began appearing in certain public buildings and wealthy homes, although for many ordinary families, candles and oil lamps remained trusted companions for years. One fascinating feature of the Victorian period is how carefully people balanced tradition with progress. They welcomed useful inventions while still preserving familiar customs. Letters remained meaningful despite faster communication. Family dinners continued despite busier cities. Evening reading beside the fireplace remained popular despite changing technology. Some comforts never lost their value. As we continue our peaceful journey, notice how every invention ultimately served the same purpose: helping families live a little more comfortably, travel a little farther, communicate a little faster, work a little more efficiently. Yet none of these remarkable achievements replaced the importance of home. After every railway journey ended, after every holiday concluded, after every exciting adventure, Victorian couples eventually returned to the place where ordinary life quietly continued. Perhaps that explains why so many diaries from the period describe homecoming with such affection. The familiar creak of the front gate, the comforting smell of one's own kitchen, favorite chairs waiting beside the fireplace, books resting exactly where they had been left, the sound of children laughing upstairs. These ordinary sights often brought greater happiness than the journey itself. History sometimes encourages us to believe that happiness exists only in extraordinary events. The Victorians might gently disagree. They often discovered contentment within familiar routines repeated with care and gratitude. Now the rain outside begins to grow lighter. Clouds slowly drift apart, revealing a sky scattered with quiet stars. The railway station has fallen silent. The seaside promenade rests beneath the moon. Our peaceful Victorian home waits patiently with its warm fire, comfortable chairs, and familiar routines. Take one more slow, relaxing breath. Allow your thoughts to drift like the steam from a distant locomotive disappearing into the cool night air. In our next chapter, we will explore another gentle aspect of Victorian married life: how families welcomed new babies, celebrated childhood, guided young sons and daughters towards adulthood, and quietly passed their values from one generation to the next, ensuring that the traditions of home continued far into the future. The rain has finally stopped. A peaceful stillness settles over the countryside and the city alike, leaving the streets washed clean beneath the pale glow of the moon. The rooftops glisten softly,
And somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once before the night becomes quiet again. Our journey through Victorian England now brings us to one of the most meaningful parts of family life. Not grand celebrations, not important political events, but the gentle passing of values from one generation to the next. For Victorian couples, building a family was often seen as one of life's greatest responsibilities. Children were not simply expected to grow, they were expected to learn, to become honest, to become hardworking, to become kind. Parents believed these qualities were formed little by little through ordinary days filled with routine, patience, and careful example. Lessons rarely ended when school dismissed for the afternoon. The home itself became another classroom. A father might teach his son how to repair a broken chair or polish a pair of boots. A mother might patiently show her daughter how to sew a torn sleeve, bake fresh bread, or organize a household cupboard. These practical skills were considered every bit as important as reading or arithmetic. Many families believed that useful knowledge gave a person confidence throughout life. Evening remained the favorite time for learning together. After supper, children often gathered around the dining table with books borrowed from local libraries or carefully purchased over many years. Reading aloud continued to be one of the household's greatest pleasures. Sometimes a chapter from a novel filled the room with quiet excitement. Other evenings brought stories from history, travel, or distant countries that few listeners would ever have the opportunity to visit. Books opened windows to the wider world. Curiosity was encouraged, provided it was accompanied by good manners and humility. Victorian parents also valued punctuality. Clocks quietly ruled much of daily life. Children learned to arrive on time. Meals began at expected hours. Church services followed reliable schedules. Workplaces demanded promptness. To many Victorians, respecting another person's time demonstrated respect for the person themselves. It was a simple lesson, yet one that shaped everyday behavior. Discipline, however, looked rather different than it does today. Some families maintained very strict rules. Others governed with remarkable gentleness. Just as in every era, no two households were exactly alike. History reminds us that families have always developed their own traditions according to personality, circumstances, and individual beliefs. Grandparents often played important roles as well. Many lived nearby, while others visited regularly for holidays and family gatherings. Their stories connected younger generations with a past that seemed almost legendary. Children listened with fascination as grandparents described life before railways became common, before telegraph wires stretched across the countryside, or before entire neighborhoods had grown where quiet fields once stood. Through these stories, history remained alive, not inside museums, but around ordinary family fireplaces. As children grew older, responsibilities gradually increased. Older brothers might help carry coal into the house or assist with shopping. Older sisters often supervised younger siblings, organized sewing materials, or help prepare meals. These duties taught cooperation rather than independence alone. Victorian society believed families worked best when everyone contributed according to their ability. There was satisfaction in feeling useful. One especially charming custom involved preserving family memories. Locks of a baby's hair might be carefully tied with ribbon and placed inside small keepsake boxes. Birth announcements were folded neatly into family Bibles. Photographs became treasured possessions as cameras gradually became more accessible. Albums rested proudly upon drawing room tables, ready to be shared whenever relatives came to visit. Each photograph represented a precious moment: a wedding, a christening, a birthday, a family gathering in the garden. Unlike today's endless digital images, Victorian photographs were taken thoughtfully. Every portrait required preparation. Clothing was chosen carefully, hair arranged neatly. Everyone remained perfectly still while the photographer completed the exposure. The result often became a family treasure for generations. As evening once again approaches, our familiar Victorian household settles into another comforting routine. The kitchen grows quieter. The last dishes are dried and returned to their shelves. The family cat curls beside the fading warmth of the fireplace. Outside, neighbors exchange one final wave before closing their front doors. One by one, lamps appear in upstairs windows. Soon, they disappear again. Darkness gently embraces the entire street. Perhaps the greatest lesson Victorian married life quietly offers is this: extraordinary happiness was rarely expected. Instead, people searched for meaning within ordinary days. Preparing breakfast together, watching children grow, writing letters to distant relatives, repairing worn clothing rather than replacing it, walking home beneath gentle evening skies, sharing peaceful silence beside a warm fire. These moments rarely became newspaper headlines, yet together they form the true history of Victorian family life. History is not built only by famous queens, celebrated inventors, or remarkable explorers. It is also built by countless ordinary husbands and wives who cared for one another, raised families, welcomed neighbors, and quietly hoped tomorrow would be a little kinder than yesterday. As our peaceful evening draws toward its close, the house seems wrapped in perfect stillness. The grandfather clock continues its faithful ticking. A cool breeze brushes gently against the curtains. The last ember in the fireplace glows softly before fading into ash. Take another slow breath. Allow yourself to rest in the comforting simplicity of this quiet Victorian home. Its ordinary routines, patient traditions, and gentle rhythms have carried us through another peaceful chapter of history. And as sleep slowly settles over every room, our journey through Victorian married life will continue in the next part, where we will reflect on the lasting legacy of these families, separate popular myths from historical reality, and discover why their quiet way of living continues to fascinate people more than a century later. Our journey through Victorian England is nearly complete. The house around us has grown wonderfully still. Every candle has long since been extinguished, every curtain carefully drawn, and every member of the household has drifted into peaceful sleep. Only the old grandfather clock continues its steady rhythm, faithfully measuring the quiet passage of time. As we sit beside the fireplace, now glowing with only a few fading embers, it is the perfect moment to reflect upon everything we have quietly discovered together. When many people hear the words Victorian marriage, they immediately imagine a world of endless rules, strict manners, and emotionless relationships. Like many popular ideas about history, the truth is both simpler and far more interesting. The Victorian era certainly valued discipline. Etiquette mattered, respectability mattered, family reputation mattered. Yet behind those formal customs lived ordinary human beings whose hopes were surprisingly familiar. They worried about paying bills, they celebrated birthdays, they laughed with friends, they comforted children after frightening dreams, they looked after aging parents, they argued from time to time, and most importantly, they tried to build peaceful homes where those they loved could feel safe. Perhaps this is why historians increasingly encourage us to look beyond famous events and instead study everyday life. Wars change borders, kings and queens influence governments, inventors reshape industries, but ordinary families quietly shape society itself. Inside thousands of Victorian homes, values were passed from parents to children without speeches or ceremonies. Kindness, honesty, patience, responsibility, respect for others. These lessons appeared during breakfast conversations, evening walks, shared work, and quiet bedtime routines. One generation taught the next simply by living. Another popular myth suggests that Victorian husbands and wives lived entirely separate emotional lives.
historical letters tell a different story. Many surviving letters exchanged between married couples reveal affection, encouragement, gentle humor, and genuine concern for one another's well-being. Of course, not every marriage was happy. Some relationships suffered from illness, others faced financial hardship, some struggled with loss that words could scarcely describe. History rarely presents perfect families because perfect families have never truly existed. The Victorians were no different. They experienced both joy and sorrow, often within the same year. Yet, through these changing seasons of life, routine remained remarkably comforting. The familiar sound of the morning kettle, fresh bread cooling upon the kitchen table, a favorite chair beside the fire, letters arriving with the afternoon post, children returning from school, the evening lamp glowing softly in the drawing room. These ordinary moments provided stability during uncertain times. In many ways, modern research continues to support what Victorian families quietly practiced. Strong relationships are often strengthened not by extraordinary adventures, but by consistent everyday habits, shared meals, respectful conversation, reliable routines, thoughtful acts of kindness, time spent together without distraction. Although technology has transformed our world beyond anything Victorians could have imagined, these simple foundations remain surprisingly timeless. Imagine for one final moment that you are standing outside our Victorian home. The street lies silent beneath the stars. A gentle mist drifts lazily across the cobblestones. Rows of brick houses stretch into the distance, each one holding its own unique story. Inside one home, a young couple is beginning married life together. In another, grandparents quietly read beside the fire. Across the street, children dream peacefully after another ordinary day at school. Farther along the road, a widow carefully folds away treasured family letters before blowing out her candle. Every home contains memories. Every family carries hopes. Every ordinary day quietly becomes history. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson this peaceful journey has offered. History does not belong only to famous people. It belongs equally to ordinary husbands and wives whose names never appeared in newspapers, but whose daily lives shaped the communities around them. Their quiet routines helped build neighborhoods. Their patience raised future generations. Their careful work strengthened families. Their small acts of kindness echoed far beyond their own front doors. As Queen Victoria's long reign gradually drew toward its close, the world prepared to enter a brand new century. Electric lights became brighter. Motor cars slowly replaced horse-drawn carriages. Telephones began connecting distant voices. New inventions arrived almost every year. Yet countless Victorian values quietly continued into the 20th century. Courtesy, responsibility, love expressed through everyday actions, the comfort of family traditions, the importance of home. These ideas survived because they had become part of ordinary life, and perhaps they remain meaningful even today. Now our fireplace has almost completely faded into ash. Outside, dawn is still many hours away. The moon continues its silent journey across the sky, while every room inside the house rests peacefully. Take one final slow breath. Allow your shoulders to relax. Feel the comforting stillness surrounding this quiet Victorian home. For tonight, there are no urgent responsibilities, no hurried schedules. Only the gentle rhythm of history unfolding one peaceful day at a time. Thank you for joining this calm journey through the private world of Victorian married life. May the quiet streets, warm fireplaces, soft candlelight, and steady ticking clocks remain with you as you drift into a deep and restful sleep. Good night, and sleep well. And now, dear listener, our peaceful journey through Victorian England has gently reached its final moments.
The night has grown wonderfully quiet. Beyond the windows of our imagined home, the streets rest beneath a silver blanket of moonlight. The gas lamps continue their silent watch, their warm glow reflected across damp cobblestones that have witnessed countless ordinary lives. Nothing moves with urgency. Nothing demands your attention. Everything is still. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the soft crackle of the last glowing ember in the fireplace. Somewhere far away, a church clock marks another passing hour before once again surrendering to silence. For just a little while longer, let us remain here. Throughout our journey, we have explored drawing rooms filled with quiet conversation, kitchens alive with the comforting aroma of fresh bread, peaceful gardens blooming in spring, crowded railway stations, sleepy seaside towns, bustling markets, and warm family evenings gathered around the fire. Yet perhaps the most remarkable discovery was also the simplest. The private lives of Victorian couples were rarely extraordinary. They were built upon thousands of ordinary moments. A cup of tea shared after a long day, a carefully written letter, a walk through the neighborhood, a favorite chair beside the fireplace, a family meal enjoyed without hurry, a quiet good night before the candle was blown out. History often remembers the loudest voices, the greatest inventions, the largest battles, the most powerful rulers. But everyday life tells another story, a quieter story, one that reminds us civilization is built not only by famous people, but by millions of ordinary families whose names have slowly faded from memory. Imagine those homes once more. One family laughed gently while finishing supper. Another quietly reads together beneath an oil lamp. Across the street, a young couple carefully plans their future with hopeful optimism. Nearby, grandparents tell stories to eager children wrapped in warm blankets. Each home is different. Each family carries its own joys, worries, traditions, and dreams. Yet together, they form the living heartbeat of Victorian England. Time, of course, continued moving forward. Children became parents. Parents became grandparents. Old houses welcomed new generations. Horse-drawn carriages slowly gave way to more cars. Gas lamps eventually surrendered to electricity. Letters that once traveled for days would one day be replaced by telephones, computers, and devices the Victorians could scarcely have imagined. The world changed, but many of life's greatest comforts remained surprisingly familiar. The comfort of returning home after a long day, the warmth of sharing a meal with those we care about, the reassurance of familiar routines, the quiet happiness found in ordinary evenings. These things belong to no single century. They belong to every generation. Perhaps that explains why Victorian history continues to feel strangely comforting. It reminds us that despite changing fashions, changing technology, and changing societies, people have always searched for many of the same things: a peaceful home, a dependable companion, a meaningful day's work, a good night's rest, and hope that tomorrow might be just a little brighter than today. As our story gently comes to its close, imagine one final scene. The house sleeps peacefully. Heavy curtains keep the cool night outside. The grandfather clock continues its faithful ticking in the hallway. The fire has faded completely, leaving only the faint scent of warm wood lingering in the room. Upstairs, every bedroom is quiet. Outside, the first hint of dawn is still far beyond the horizon. The world seems to pause. For one brief moment, nothing is expected of anyone. There are no chores to complete, no trains to catch, no letters to answer. Only silence, only peace, only rest. If this journey has helped you slow your thoughts, then perhaps we have experienced something the Victorians themselves deeply valued: the simple comfort of an unhurried evening and the quiet reassurance of home. Thank you for allowing me to accompany you through the gentle rhythms of Victorian England. May your dreams be as peaceful as the quiet village streets after midnight, as warm as a well-tended fireplace on a winter evening, and as calm as the soft glow of candlelight dancing across the walls of an old family home. Until our next journey into history, rest well, sleep deeply, and let the quiet echoes of the Victorian age slowly fade into the peaceful silence of the night. Good night.
The house rests peacefully now. The final candle has burned low, leaving only the soft orange glow of the fireplace to illuminate the room. Outside, the moon hangs quietly above the rooftops of Victorian England, watching over rows of sleeping homes where countless ordinary families dream beneath thick quilts and carefully stitched blankets. Take another slow, comfortable breath. Allow the silence to settle around you. Tonight, we continue not with grand historical events, but with the small celebrations that quietly filled Victorian family life with warmth and meaning. Although the Victorian era is often remembered for strict manners and formal customs, family celebrations were surprisingly heartfelt. They offered moments when everyday responsibilities paused, allowing husbands, wives, children, grandparents, and neighbors to enjoy each other's company.